Hi guys, so I'm back in my old haunt, my old venue out here, so apologies for those of you who have problems with the sound when I film in this room. I know it's a bit more echoey, but I need a bit more space to move around. Clearly when I'm filming in my study, where the room with the swords on the wall, I don't have very much space to move. In this video I'm going to get through quite a few swords, so I need a bit more space to move around. Okay, so the theme of this video is that essentially we talk about lots of different types of swords in general, in my videos and in books and on forums and in computer games and role-playing games and so on. However, the theme of this video is that although there are lots of types of swords, the common types of sword actually fit into a relatively small type of cross-section of the blade. Okay, so in actual fact, although there are lots of different swords, there are lots of similarities between those swords. Okay, so if we ignore length and curvature for a moment and just look at cross-section of blade, we'll notice there actually aren't very many cross-sections of blade that are actually used very often in swords. So we start off with pretty much one of the most simple cross sections of blade. This is essentially what I would describe as a shallow wedge. So what I'm holding here is the 1845 pattern British Royal Navy cutlass, and the blade kind of looks almost flat actually. Okay, there's no fuller on it, and clearly there's an edge at the front and there's a flat at the back. So what we've got is a very shallow angled triangle, okay, a wedge section. This section of blade is very easy to make, but it also provides a very fine edge, quite a small edge, not the toughest of edges but quite easy to sharpen, and we see this type of blade across the world over a very large period of time in history. Right the way up to the 20th century you still see it on cutlasses, and in fact going back into antiquity you see this pretty much flat or shallow wedge section of blade. Next sword, and this is a continuation of that. So we've got the very shallow wedge. It's a very common section of blade to see on Indian tulwars. You also see the same on Middle Eastern shamshir as well, and indeed on some Japanese katanas, although they're slightly more complex, as you know. I'll get onto katanas in a second. And indeed on some Chinese and Korean swords as well. Okay, so here we've essentially got a wedge section. Only difference here is that some very shallow fullers, i.e. are grooves. They're there to reduce weight in the blade without reducing its stiffness. Okay, but that's still essentially a shallow wedge section blade. Very common on tulwars. Many tulwars do not have fullers. Many of them have the same blade section as that cutlass I just showed. Okay. Next up, the katana. Okay. This is essentially a wedge section, quite a thick wedge section, and this example, as you can see, has a fuller placed near the back edge of the blade. However, many katanas, probably actually statistically most katanas in history, have not had a fuller in the blade, and they're essentially a wedge section that then has a little flat sort of region at the rear of the blade, and sometimes that flat at the rear of the blade has fullers ground or hammered into it. Okay, however many of them don't. They just have a flat section to the blade and then a wedge. The katana is a relatively narrow blade, narrower than most Indian blades, narrower than a lot of European blades as well, narrower than most Chinese blades. It's quite narrow, but it's quite thick. Okay, and as I've spoken about in previous videos, that's partly because of the way that the katana is made, but I won't go into that in this video. But important point to note, the blade cross-section of the katana is not particularly unusual on a worldwide scale. Okay, and in actual fact, next example, here we have a Renaissance 16th century style basket hilted backsword. Okay, now this backsword has pretty much exactly the same blade cross section as the katana I just showed you. Yes, it is a straight blade. instead of a curved blade. However, it is nevertheless a wedge section, a fairly thick wedge section in this case. It's about the same width as the katana, it's about the same thickness as the katana, and indeed it has a fuller of about the same width and located in the same place. I'll just hold up the two blades there for you to see. So you can see the base of the blade has a very similar cross section in both cases. The only real differences between these blades are that the European one is straight, the katana is of course curved, and also katanas tend to not have distal taper, or at least not have very much distal taper. Distal taper, i.e. they become less thick as you go along the blade towards the point. European swords usually do have distal taper, and this example does also. Okay, so this gets thinner and lighter towards the tip. The katana stays thick and stays heavy towards the tip. Okay, but the cross section is very, very similar between these two swords. Next up, moving forwards in history, we have the 1853 pattern British Cavalry sabre, and this, as you'll see again, has almost exactly the same cross section to the blade as the katana and the backsword I just showed. So some people seem to be under the misconception that 19th century swords were very different to what had gone before. They are not. This is the same width, the same length and the same blade cross section as an 18th century backsword, or indeed a 16th century backsword. The 19th century sabre is essentially a backsword, it's just slightly curved. And the fact that it's slightly curved really doesn't affect a lot of things at all. It is essentially a backsword by another name. Okay? And again, we've got the same blade cross section, a thick wedge with a fuller running up the back of the blade. So we've got continuity here. The cross section is the same, and essentially the sword is very, very similar to many other types of sword across the world, across a wide period of time. Okay, now we're going to look at double-edged blades. Okay, so we've looked at single-edged blades. Essentially, the variety of single-edged blades are all wedge section, obviously with an edge at the front and either a flat or a rounded part at the back. Some of them have a fuller, some of them don't. Some of them have multiple fillers, but that's essentially a detail. They're all wedge sections of steel. Okay, so they're all very, very similar, whether it's a katana, a backsword, a falchion, a mesa, a sax, or a saber. Okay, they're all very, very similar in cross section and therefore fundamentally very similar to each other. So, double-edged blades. Essentially, they split into two main types. Double-edged blades which are diamond section, we'd say, or flattened diamond section. That is, they have, it's like a flattened square, in fact. So you have a medial ridge running along the blade and two edges either side. Or that with a fuller added in the centre. The reason for adding the fuller is you can make a wider blade with the same weight. Okay? So essentially you squash the blade outwards and you create a wider cutting blade without adding weight to it. Okay? The diamond sectioned blade with the midrib along the centre, the spine along the centre, is obviously a narrower blade, but it is stiffer. It's generally speaking not so good at cutting, but it is generally speaking better at thrusting, certainly through resistive targets like mail or padded armour. Okay? So, we've essentially got two types of double-edged blades, the fullered type and the non-fullered type, the diamond section blade. Okay? And they're both cut and thrust swords. However, each of these can be narrowed and lengthened, or narrowed and stiffened, i.e. thickened, to result ultimately in the rapier blade. Okay, so what we have here is a rapier at the top, a longsword at the bottom, and clearly this weapon is more specialised towards thrusting and is longer blade. This weapon, the longsword, is a combination cut and thrust weapon, a compromised design. But they are essentially both very similar blades. It's just that one is thinner and longer. The weight, incidentally, is not that different between the two. All they've done with the rapier really is made it narrower and longer with a similar amount of steel. But they are both diamond section blades and both double-edged. Okay, so there we go. A quick run through pretty much the most common types of blade cross-section. And you'll see that single-edged blades and double-edged blades don't actually divide down into many different types. Yes, there are different styles of fuller, different lengths of fuller, these are kind of details, but by and large, single-edged swords are a wedge section either with or without a fuller, and double-edged blades are a diamond cross-section either with or without a fuller. Okay, thank you.